everybody. The last time I was in Los Angeles, someone who knows a lot about these things made the case to me that it's not streamers or studio movies that nobody likes that are killing moviegoing. It is user-generated content on the internet. And that is the way I have often thought about platforms like TikTok and YouTube. They're wildly popular with basically everyone alive, but they also keep making the case that you don't need to leave your house to go buy a movie ticket or even commit to an hour-long Netflix drama to get something really entertaining, and it's damaging the entertainment industry as we know it. But it's also really clear that the creator economy built by these platforms is here to stay, and that there's really fascinating and compelling stuff out there, including a handful of shows that are now trying to crack their way into the Emmy race. So for this week's show, I've invited Natalie Jarvey, author of the Like and Subscribe newsletter and a somewhat new member of the Ankler family, to talk about the world of creators who have disrupted Hollywood and shaped the entertainment industry in their own image, but also still seem to want the mainstream industry recognition of an Emmy nomination. And speaking of things getting recognized in the industry, after I talk to Natalie, you'll hear my conversation with Jason Isaacs, one of the stars of HBO's blockbuster new season of The White Lotus, who talks to me about how you learn to navigate that level of recognition and also, of course, the Southern accents that we all cannot stop talking about. I'm Katie Rich, and this is the Prestige Junkie Podcast. Natalie, thank you for joining me to talk about something that you know so much about, and I just keep feeling like I'm going to understand the creator economy or like what that means or all this, and it keeps eluding me, and I always come to you, and now I'm going to do it on microphone for you to tell me about this entire world that you've been covering for so long.
I'm so excited to talk about YouTube and this whole world with you.
I mean, you and I worked together previously at Vanity Fair. Now here at the Ankler, we're very enmeshed in kind of the old systems of Hollywood and very invested in them. But you have always had this interest in the world of creators that's only gotten bigger as your career has gone on. So just like really to start with, why is this the thing that you care about? Not only, but something that you find so fascinating.
Well, I kind of lucked my way into writing about this space. I started covering the tech industry about 15 years ago, my goodness. And I was really writing about LA-based tech organizations. I saw the rise of Snapchat. I wrote a lot about like Tinder. And one of my challenges trying to write about technology from Los Angeles as opposed to from Silicon Valley, where everything was taking place, is how could I make these stories resonate for an LA community of readers? And one way to do that was by writing about the creators that had started to move to Los Angeles and form media companies to, take advantage of new platforms like YouTube. And once I started digging into that space, I just found it so fun and interesting because here were all these like young, ambitious people who, instead of waiting for Hollywood to come calling, were able to like turn on a video camera from their bedroom and start recording and build these huge, massive audiences. And I don't think anyone expected that it would become what it is today. I mean, it's an industry now that commands well north of $250 billion a year. So it didn't start necessarily intentionally as something that would turn into a profession for a lot of these people, but along the way it did. And that was really fun to write about and explore and see the power of what they were building and the audiences that they were, starting to build on platforms like YouTube.
Yeah. I mean, can you remember when was the first point where it started feeling like it was more than like people making videos of their getting ready routines or like whatever, the Instagram trends of the 2010s were, and like something that kind of more approaches art and like approaches something that's like a real contribution to a form and not just something to waste time on when you're watching it on the commute?
Well, I think pretty early on, you did start to see that YouTube videos had a certain like DNA to them. Mm-hmm. There were kind of these quick cuts that creators would do, to cut between takes and be able to edit their videos together. And I remember talking to an editor years ago now who had a young daughter who had watched enough of these videos that she would grab his phone and she would mimic that style. Whoa. And, talk to the camera in the way that her favorite creators did. Yeah. And I would argue that, that really was an art form, a different art form than we might be used to on TV or in movies, but definitely a form unto itself. And that, to me, made me realize like, okay, there's something more happening here. Yeah. It's not just, the Charlie Bit Me video or these, kind of silly one-offs that, these are people building formats who are developing essentially, kind of like almost talk shows for the internet.
Yeah. And like, do you feel like those talk shows like still kind of speak their own language? Like, we're going to get to things like Hot Ones in a minute that I think are so popular. They now like are considered like the mainstream general format. Like, but do you still think that like YouTube and TikTok really have their own language that's like completely separate from what the rest of Hollywood's going to produce?
I think so. And it depends on the platform. Each of these platforms, has a style that works for them.
Yeah.
YouTube is the interesting one because YouTube used to be short form, and now a lot of the creators who are finding the biggest success are doing longer form content there. These are 20, 30-minute videos, and they do start to resemble more traditional TV in some ways, at least traditional unscripted TV.
Yeah.
There is some scripted on YouTube, but that's harder, and we can talk about that. But certain shows have started to look more like a late night show or a morning show or a talk show, but just one that's distributed on YouTube instead of on ABC.
Yeah, like Rhett and Link, they're creators you talk to in Sundance. Like they have, I think, Good Mythical Morning. Again,
Good Mythical Morning.
Out of my depth here. But is that what you mean? That it like mimics the format of a morning show, but it's got its own like YouTube flair to it, right?
Exactly. Yeah. They produce a daily show and it's kind of like a talk show. They'll bring on guests. They have silly kind of bits and segments that they do pretty regularly. It's definitely very of the internet. It's not the Today Show, but it could, in a different world, probably live on a platform like that. And it certainly stands up alongside, any of the kind of talk shows that you see on, linear television. And it's attracting a whole audience of people who aren't watching Good Morning America or The Today Show.
Yeah. Well, when you think about it, like the Today Show format is like more or less what it was like since the 50s. Like, and there's no law that's saying that's what the talk show format has to be. But what TV networks are constantly asking is like, what do people like? What do they want to see? And these creators have such more immediate access to that. Like it lets them be different, right? It lets them take risks because they have an algorithm that can tell them whether or not they're doing the right thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've seen the traditional TV networks try to edge into this space a little bit. A few years ago, a YouTube creator named Lily Singh got her own late night talk show. It didn't last very long. Mm-hmm. We've just heard that CBS is going to cancel its more internet-inspired late-night talk show with Taylor Tomlinson. So, these formats don't necessarily totally work on those traditional networks, at least in the way that they've tried to do them. I do think that there's some opportunity for that crossover to happen. But, people do like watching this on the internet. And it is because, you don't have to tune into Good Mythical Morning at a set time. It's not necessarily appointment viewing in the same way. I hear a lot of anecdotes from people who, like to watch these shows that, they find time throughout their day to put them on while they're working or having breakfast or different things. But, it does create a different habit than these shows that, you have to watch them at 10 a.m.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't watch Lily Singh and Taylor Tomlinson shows, but you get the idea that maybe it's not that the formats didn't work, but like the audience who wants to see them has no interest in tuning in at whatever specific time or setting a DVR or all these things that like increasingly feel really antiquated. Like the people who watch late night TV are only getting older, but that's the network's problems to solve, not Lily Singh's. She's got her own thing that's totally separate from that.
Yeah, exactly. And, so much of late night TV now, especially, is all just clips on YouTube anyway. So a lot of people, that's how they consume that content. They're not sitting down and watching all of, The Tonight Show, but they might, check out a video of Jimmy Fallon interviewing a certain person that I want to hear from or, a band that's performing. But I rarely sit down and watch one of those shows start to finish.
Yeah. I mean, the question that animates so much of the work you're doing at Like and Subscribe is how Hollywood is dealing with all of this in general. Do you feel like mainstream Hollywood has grappled enough with what these creators mean and like found any way to actually work together or keep up with this?
I don't think so. I think we're really at the beginning of a lot more collaboration between mainstream Hollywood and YouTube creators. What's interesting is that, of course, anytime someone starts to build an audience, Hollywood comes calling.
Yeah.
So, all the way back in the earliest days that I was writing about this space, Hollywood was paying attention to creators. The talent agencies started signing really early, YouTube creators in particular. And then there was this whole wave of acquisitions that happened in Hollywood where, Disney bought a company called Maker Studios, which had basically formed a network of a bunch of top YouTubers. And DreamWorks Animation bought Awesomeness TV, which did something similar, but for more like youth and like kid and tween skewing programming.
Yeah.
And creators. And so there were all these wave of acquisitions. And for the most part, those were not successful because Hollywood didn't really know what to do with these companies and how to use them. And most of those deals kind of ultimately broke down. Those companies don't really exist today. I mean, some of them do. Awesomeness TV is still a part of Paramount. And, you know, a few of them still hang around, but not really in the original iteration in which they were founded. At the same time that all that was happening, there was a whole group of YouTubers who did want to try to leverage their online fame into Hollywood. A bunch of them made these kind of direct to home video movies. None of them really were huge hits. There were a couple small breakouts. You know, there were definitely attempts to cast YouTube creators into movies and TV shows. And the problem with a lot of these early efforts is that I think Hollywood kind of misunderstood what made these creators popular and successful. It wasn't that they were amazing actors. Maybe some of them were. It was really more that they had these incredibly charismatic personalities and that what people wanted to see from them was their real life or a version of their real life on camera, that there was something relatable about that they weren't getting from movies or from TV shows. Yeah. And you couldn't just port that to Hollywood the way that you expected. Yeah. So what was interesting is a lot of that stopped. And I think there was a while where Hollywood and traditional creators weren't really doing as much together. And now we're starting to see that change in Hollywood. I think especially right now while we're having, you know, this kind of moment in Hollywood with layoffs and budget cuts and kind of questions about what's happening in the entertainment industry, creators are suddenly starting to look a lot more appealing.
Yeah. Do you think that they've learned their lessons and they're going to do it differently this time?
I think so. I mean, maybe not in all cases, but I think we're starting to see that. I think Mr. Beast's Amazon show, Beast Games, is a really interesting example of instead of trying to cast Mr. Beast in some cameo that's going to generate a lot of headlines in some upcoming movie, they gave him a whole TV show that, you know, really kind of spoke to what people like about Mr. Beast, which is that everything's big and over the top and larger than life. And that was a huge success for Amazon. And we've also seen that now with Jake Paul and Logan Paul are the stars of a new Max docuseries that, you know, they're, again, not trying to make them actors or anything. They're trying to make them personalities like the Kardashians, and they already are.
I was just going to ask, how different is that from like Kim Kardashian becoming famous from a sex tape that's a really early version of being an internet influencer, and then she got a show about her life? Is the Paul show basically exactly the same format?
It's similar, yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of natural comparisons there because the Paul show, it's called Paul American. It basically charts the last 3 years of Jake Paul and Logan Paul's lives. So you're seeing the build up to Jake Paul's fight against Mike Tyson, which was live streamed on Netflix. Yeah. Many people watched that. Millions of people watched that. So, you know, the show isn't giving you the fight, but it's giving you all the behind the scenes about the fight that maybe you didn't realize was happening. And I would argue that's similar to the Kardashian show in that, so much of what you see are events that already took place, but now many months later you're able to go back and watch, you know, kind of what was happening to the family behind the scenes when those very publicized events were happening.
Or like the Vanderpump Rules season that all the scandals broke out in.
Yeah.
I mean, so last week's episode, I talked to Landon Bryant, who I know from Instagram, and he was talking about the way that these influencers have risen with this authenticity, that there's this assumption of like being yourself. But like authenticity is something that mainstream Hollywood struggles with so much. Like, can Hollywood ever capture that like language you've all become so familiar with from the internet? Is it even worth trying to chase that?
I don't think so. No. I mean, the thing I think that creators are really good at is helping bring their audiences along for that journey. And people who have been following creators, you know, from the very beginning do feel a sense of kind of pride when a creator succeeds in something that has been a goal of theirs. Yep. So, you know, those things can be successful if the creator does the like work behind the scenes of saying like to their audience, like, hey, this is why I wanted to do this. This is why I wanted to have a show in Hollywood. And this is what it means for me. And please come check it out. And here's how I made sure it still felt like me, even though it's much bigger than what I did before.
So, I mean, the big question I always come back to is like these people who have a platform and an audience and are making money off of YouTube or TikTok. Why do they want Hollywood in the first place? Like, what is in it for them to deal with this system that doesn't necessarily understand what they do?
Not all of them do. Some of them have kind of publicly said, I don't need this. I'm good. Hollywood comes with a lot more decision makers, a lot more notes, and a lot more people meddling with your content, whereas creators have a lot of creative control when they're just posting things to YouTube or Instagram or TikTok. But for the creators who do still have Hollywood ambitions, it is about a stamp of legitimacy. It's about saying, what I'm doing is art. Back to your original question, it does matter. And here are these decision makers in Hollywood who one could argue have kind of long been the people who decide what is art and what gets to be on people's TV screens. Like they've decided that what I've done is good enough for that too.
Yeah.
There's something very powerful in that. And, I think, someone like a Mr. Beast, he just wants to be the biggest person, the biggest on any platform. So, of course, he's going to want to eventually take on Hollywood and did with the Amazon show because he'd already conquered YouTube. So what's next? Traditional entertainment.
The next mountain to cross. Yeah, I mean, the question that I had posed to you before we started recording that I don't know that the answer to is like, when does something on YouTube become television? When do you go, like Charlie Bit My Finger is obviously not worthy of trying to contend for an Emmy, but we're getting shows like Rhett and Link or Hot Ones that are putting themselves in the mix for this. Like, where does that line get crossed? Who decides that like something that is internet created content is art?
Well, I think art and television are probably two different things. Sometimes one could argue.
Television has risen so far in the last 20 years, and now we have to call it art, but maybe we're going back in the other direction.
Well, I think it can be art, but not all of it is art, right?
Yeah.
Maybe. I don't know. I think for starters, you've got these connected TVs now, smart TVs in people's living rooms that aren't just playing them NBC, ABC, HBO. They're also where you access Netflix and Amazon's Prime Video and YouTube. So for starters, I think for a lot of young people, it is TV automatically for them because they're not getting it in a different way than they're getting, the rest of television. Then I think you can start to look at, well, how are people watching YouTube these days? Something that I find really interesting is that viewing of YouTube on connected TVs has now surpassed viewing of YouTube on mobile devices and computers. So people are primarily watching YouTube from their living rooms or wherever they have a TV in their home.
Wow.
Which means that they are treating YouTube like television.
Yeah.
And that is, I think, why we've also started to see a lot more long-form content, long-form videos succeed on YouTube is because that's what people want. They're sitting down in front of that TV. They want something, that they can really dig into and spend time with as opposed to a short couple-minute video.
Yeah.
So that is definitely starting to preference those kinds of longer videos, which means that creators are going to create them and they're going to start to look more like television.
Yeah.
I think something like a Hot Ones, is basically a talk show format. It's got the funny conceit of you have to eat, spicy chicken wings while you're doing an interview. But at the end of the day, that's, those videos are typically upwards of 20 minutes long. That's starting to look a lot like a TV show to me. I think it becomes a little bit like it when you see it. And I think it when you see it on YouTube when something is more TV-like than just a short viral video.
Yeah. I mean, that feels very encouraging to me as someone who really holds on to like television, again, like being a traditionalist. Like, you think of YouTube as being something that will distract people as a second screen away from the longer thing that they're watching. But if the human brain does crave those kind of longer narratives, like maybe we can save ourselves. Maybe the art of storytelling on television isn't dead and being replaced by TikToks.
I think people always want stories. That's never going to go away. And yes, lots of young people in particular are spending more time on their phones and watching shorter videos. But, personally, I think that people are always going to crave juicy, interesting, exciting stories.
But you also said that fiction on YouTube does not work that well. Like unscripted is really the thing that is powerful. Like why have we not crossed that barrier?
I think it's partly because fiction and scripted is a lot more expensive to make. So for creators who are operating from a place of, relying on internet advertising, Google AdSense, to make their money, it can be a lot harder to fund that kind of content. I mean, and this goes back to something when you asked earlier about why Hollywood recognition matters. I think for some creators, it's about saying the videos I'm making aren't any different than the TV shows that you're advertising on, traditional television. And we should be able to make the same amount of money in advertising that a kind of traditional TV show can make. So, that's something that still lags behind on YouTube is how much money creators can command for when they're working with brands and sponsors. So that's partly why scripted is hard.
Is that just because they obviously they're not going to get Super Bowl ads, but is that just more evidence of Hollywood being behind and advertisers being behind? Or is there something about it you think that the advertising is powerful in some way?
That's definitely part of it. I also think you have to look at YouTube as, this huge platform. I mean, it has 2.5 billion monthly active users and, there's 8 billion total people on this earth. So think about how many people are on YouTube and think about how many people are uploading videos to YouTube. Anyone can upload a video to YouTube. So the challenge with YouTube has always been, is it brand safe? Because not every video there is something that advertisers are going to want to, put their money behind.
Yep.
And so YouTube has had to do a lot of legwork behind the scenes to make sure that when brands want to buy advertisements on its platform, that they can do it on the, kind of the top creators, this kind of more, quote, premium content that, is brand friendly, brand safe, and is going to be, something that they'll want to be associated with. And so that has, YouTube has done that work that has helped raise the rates that creators can command on its platform. But that is partly why ad rates have lagged behind kind of traditional Hollywood ad rates, is that it's not as curated as a broadcast television network's programming is.
Well, I guess it's the argument for the many layers of bureaucracy in Hollywood is that you get brand safety, which I know is what we all are looking for as people who want to see good stories on our televisions. Okay, so you talked to Sean Evans and Rhett and Link all at Sundance, and they were kind of open about putting themselves in the Emmy race and wanting to be considered that way. And I was looking; they all submitted themselves for the Emmys last year in. I guess the short form nonfiction or reality series is kind of the category that they could all fit into. And when you look at the nominees that actually make it through, it's the most 2009 version of internet content I can think of. It's in hacks inside the episode, or Shogun, the making of Shogun. All of them are connected to these broadcast shows. It's kind of crazy when you realize carpool karaoke makes it in there, I guess. That's something innovative that only exists on the internet, but it's just so tied into this very standard part of the industry. How do you even break into that when that is what Emmy voters think is the best thing that's online content?
I don't think we have enough time on this podcast, Katie, for me to tell you all my thoughts about the short form Emmy categories. I've probably spent more time thinking about them than your average entertainment journalist.
Because I never think about them. They're such an afterthought for me about the Emmys. So I would love to know your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I mean, there was real hope a few years ago. The Emmys changed some of the submission requirements around the short form categories. And there was real hope in the creator community that this would help bring more of their shows to the forefront and help them, gain recognition. And it largely didn't happen.
Yeah.
And I think it's because Emmy voters, like Oscar voters, they're going to focus on and they're going to vote for the shows, the movies that they've watched. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's still a real challenge around getting Emmy voters to sit down and check out Hot Ones episodes or, some, installments of Good Mythical Morning. I mean, certainly I think some Emmy voters are paying attention and watching that, but not enough to help them, have that awareness when it comes time to sit down and decide who to nominate or who to vote for. Mm-hmm. Instead, your average Emmy voter, I'm guessing, you're the expert on these people, but my sense is that they're sitting down and they're looking at these short form nominees and they're like, oh, well, I like Hacks, so sure, I'll vote for the Hacks digital short. Or, I like, name whatever show, so I'll just, vote for this thing that's really kind of more like marketing or ancillary content.
Yeah, marketing is exactly what it is. Well, it's also people who have worked in the industry a long time and presumably are like, oh my God, they make hot ones with like 10 people as opposed to 50 who would work on a late night show. Like, this is going to take away jobs and this is a format I don't understand. I think there's certainly a fear aspect to it too.
I think there definitely is. And, I can't speak for any individual show, but a lot of digital shows use non-union workers. I think there's probably a piece of that comes into play as well. But what I think is really interesting is that these short form categories, I think creators are looking beyond them now. My sense is that Hot Ones wants to be recognized in the main Emmy categories. I mean, certainly the lengths of their videos are long enough that they shouldn't have to necessarily just be considered in those short form categories now.
Yeah. Do you think it'll ever happen? Is it just a matter of time? But the time might be like 20 years, given how fast award shows move.
I think there's a lot of legwork that needs to happen behind the scenes to educate Hollywood and Academy viewers about the work that goes into these shows and why they should be considered alongside a late night show like The Tonight Show. And I don't know if we're there yet, but I know that there are a lot of efforts underway this year in particular to help creators like Sean Evans of Hot Ones and Rhett and Link and some others, Michelle Carre, who has a really fun YouTube show called Challenge Accepted.
Yep, they have publicists who are also working on shows for very major Emmy contenders. So yeah, they're clearly following a familiar path.
Exactly. Yeah. So we'll see if any of them can do it. If I had to guess, I think Hot Ones probably has the best shot because I think that one has kind of transcended, just being categorized as a YouTube show. It's hugely popular. It makes news whenever, a big star goes on that show. And, I think a lot of people treat it now like they do treat any of these late night talk shows in terms of, how the media writes about it and covers it.
Yeah, if you're stopping on Hot Ones on your Oscar campaign, I feel like that's a good sign that you have that mainstream Hollywood is paying attention to you in some way.
Yeah, so exactly. And Sean has a lot of fans too, in Hollywood because he's interviewed so many people over the years.
And it seems like he's like as respected as like Terry Gross, basically. Like he's the person who you want to like ask you questions somehow. Amazing thing to pull off. So you don't only watch YouTube. We were talking about some of the other like regular TV shows that you're watching that we want to talk about that are in the race. And I haven't talked yet on this podcast about The Studio really in depth because it came out on Apple a couple weeks ago at this point. I think as people hear this, maybe 3 episodes will be out, so we won't spoil too much. But we were talking earlier about how it's like, it's set in modern day Hollywood. It's created by Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg. It's kind of dealing with all of the many indignities of working in Hollywood these days. And it sort of deals with the streaming era as an Apple show and then sort of doesn't, which I think is super interesting. And I think you have good perspective on.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of like a cloud that hangs over the whole show, it's certainly challenging to be a studio executive today. And, that's acknowledged over and over again in
When will
the
anyone
studio.
pity the studio executives? They suffer so.
Yeah. Exactly. But it doesn't necessarily touch on kind of the challenges that, certainly the industry is facing right now. But there was an announcement that Ted Sarandos is going to be in the studio, which I have seen some screeners. So
not playing a character, I don't think. I believe it's as himself, so we don't have to worry about his acting career.
Yeah. I won't spoil too much about his appearance, but I have seen some screeners, so I have seen it, and it's pretty fun, and I think is the closest that the show gets to kind of acknowledging, the dominance of streaming. I just really want to know what the conversations were like behind the scenes that got him to make that appearance, because here he is, he's appearing on a rival streamer's show, and, he has had some kind of critical comments about Apple and their TV efforts recently. He did an interview where he said, I don't understand it beyond a marketing play, but maybe they see something we don't. Which,
that's the most like underhanded, passive aggressive, like grandmas like fighting at mahjong. Like there's so many layers to that statement. I love it.
It's essentially like I don't give it much thought because
I don't think about you at all. It's Don Draper in the elevator.
100%. We're so much bigger. We just don't even really think about you is essentially what that statement's giving.
Funny. I mean, clearly he knows it's good for him. I think the studio, as soon as I watched it, I was like, I don't know who this is for, who's never driven on a studio lot. But for the people who care about this stuff, which is like a lot of Emmy voters and like a decent amount of TV viewers, people who just, might be listening to this podcast and aren't in the industry, you want to be part of it, right? It's a club. Like all of Hollywood is wanting to be in the club. That's why Ted Sarandos wants to win an Oscar and why he'd be on the studio. He just wants to be seen as part of that group.
I think absolutely. I have the same question as you in terms of like who's going to be watching the studio. And we don't know yet, kind of how it's going to perform with audiences who aren't, entertainment workers and journalists like ourselves. Certainly Entourage was able to transcend and become a big hit show outside of just Hollywood circles.
But Entourage also had like an aspirational, like hang out with your friends thing. And the studio is so stressful. It makes running a studio seem awful and like glamorous, but awful.
Yeah, I mean, certainly I have no desire to be a studio executive, nor will ever become one at this point in my life.
No, I don't think anyone's asking us to be one at this point. I want to I have a PSA that for anyone who's gotten this far and has never seen Take This Waltz, the movie that Seth Rogen was in that was directed by Sarah Polley, which is presumably how her cameo in episode 2 happened. That movie is incredible. It's not really anything like the studio, but it also stars Michelle Williams, who has Dying for Sex out this year, and Luke Kirby, who's in the new Amy Sherman Palladino show Etoile, which will be out soon. So like everyone who was in Take This Waltz is having a big Emmy season, so everyone should catch up. Have you ever seen Take This Waltz, Natalie? Do I need to sit you down?
I haven't.
It's so good.
I need to watch. I'm going to put it on my list.
And Seth Rogen is wonderful in it. Okay, so I found the studio very stressful, and then I watched 2 episodes of The Pit and thought I was going to die sitting there on my couch. But you are one of many people I know who is stuck with it and also loves The Pit, right?
Can I tell you, there's something about the stress of The Pit that is actually almost cathartic for me. I think it's because it's not my stress. It's not my reality. It's so much worse, honestly, than any of the stressors
Literal
in my life.
Life or death stakes. It's crazy.
Yeah, there's something about it where I can kind of just let it wash over me and I can focus on the problems of these fictional characters as opposed to my own.
Yeah.
So I just really love it. And I'm so fascinated with how they've pulled it off.
Yeah.
I mean, some of the things they show you on camera are gory and gruesome. Yeah. And, I want to know everything about kind of how the production occurred. So, I think it's a real tremendous feat. And it's fun to see something that feels a little innovative while still offering you that comfort of kind of a medical procedural. But the kind of 24 style, every episode will be 1 hour in the, real life shift, quote unquote, of these doctors, makes it really fun and kind of raises the stakes and just gives it that little bit of elevation that makes it feel like, okay, it makes sense that I'm watching this on Max. And but it's still comforting somehow.
I feel like it's been a good spring for that, honestly. And you're thinking about a lot of these shows in terms of the internet, and you have to have a show that's going to grab people, that they're not going to just pull their phone out halfway through. And it doesn't mean you have to be like The Pit and have something crazy happening every minute, which is kind of how that works. But I feel like The Residence is a whodunit, but also a political thriller, and combines those things in a really interesting way that kept me guessing to the very end of it. And also Adolescence, the Netflix show that everyone keeps talking about, that's also this incredible technical feat that you don't really want to look away from. And they all have their kind of traditional basis in TV genres, but they're all doing it in a different way. And it's, again, maybe gives me hope that this format of storytelling can still grow and evolve and get audience attention back in some way.
I know for my own creative pursuits that sometimes constraints can actually help you become more creative. And I do wonder, as Hollywood has started to, as the TV industry in particular has started to really focus back in on kind of these procedural formats that, everyone from Netflix to Max seem to want right now, if that will unlock something for some of these experienced, writers and showrunners and, actually give them something kind of fun and new to play with. I think we're seeing that right now. So I hope that continues.
Yeah, that's a good point. Even The White Lotus, it starts as a murder mystery every season, and it's more playing in kind of the Mad Men, psychological drama sandbox in general, but it's using just enough of that procedural whodunit thing that keeps people going. And you're right that people can be so creative with it when they're given kind of a writing prompt or network notes and find a way around it. There's a lot of good TV out there. I mean, it's been nice.
I'm feeling like I have almost too much to watch sometimes, which is a great problem to have.
Yeah, it's incredibly overwhelming. Well, Natalie, I will continue turning to you to explain YouTube to me. I do feel like I understand it a little bit better. And if one of these guys gets nominated, if they break through at the Emmys, I'm going to give you all the credit. You made it happen.
I don't know about that, but I'll certainly come back on and talk to you about it if it happens.
I would love it. That would be
means.
Incredibly helpful. I'd be very grateful. And to everyone listening, hopefully you're already reading The Ankler and a lot of Natalie's work over there, but also you need to subscribe to Like and Subscribe as well, right?
Yes, please come check it out. I'm writing a lot about what it means to be a person creating entertainment for the internet and about the big business of the creator economy.
Yeah, it's a must read. Everyone should read it. So thanks, Natalie. We'll have you back soon.
Thanks.
So now let's hear my conversation with Jason Isaacs, who, as you surely know, has been on a real wild ride these past 8 weeks as one of the stars of this season of The White Lotus. I've been obsessing over The White Lotus like everybody else, as you have heard on this show. And I was excited to talk to Isaacs, not just about that Southern accent that's gotten so much attention on this podcast, including lots of other places. He's had such a long career to dig into. He got to start on British television and in indie films. He's been in giant blockbusters like The Patriot and Black Hawk Down, and of course, the Harry Potter movies. And he told me he's been giving advice to his younger White Lotus co-stars, including the actors who play his kids, who he still calls his kids. I thought that was really charming. He's been talking to them about how to handle that sudden rush of attention when you're in a hit and knowing that it's not necessarily going to last forever. He shared some of that advice with me, along with what he's learned from some less pleasant on-set experiences. I really tried to tell him he needs to write a memoir someday. He says he's keeping those stories to himself from now. But as someone who's worked with a lot of people, he really knows what it takes to get on a set and actually get the work done. It was great to get a glimpse inside that White Lotus bubble, as he describes it, and to see how an actor who's really seen it all is approaching something that, despite everything, still feels totally new. Hear it all in my conversation with the star of The White Lotus, Jason Isaacs. Jason Isaacs, thank you so much for joining after what you're just saying has been whirlwind touring. And a lot of it alongside your White Lotus cast. You guys are kind of this like band bouncing around together.
No, they split us up and they fired us all over the world like pellets. And we keep bouncing and overlapping. So I'm just checked into this hotel in New York, and Sarah Catherine Piper is staying next door. And we had a quick cuddle and a cup of tea. And then she is also doing stuff.
You were also together for watching the finale on Sunday, right? That was kind of like the reunion part of it.
We came together to launch it, and we came together to close it.
Perfect.
And then otherwise, we're all just keeping track of each other in WhatsApp threads, and amazingly, all over the world. I mean, it's obviously these American characters mostly, but it seems like the entire universe has embraced White Lotus. I mean, we've been inside the bubble, obviously, so it clearly doesn't make any sense. But it did seem for the last 8 weeks to all of us like everybody on planet Earth was watching it. Now I've emerged from the bubble. Clearly, that's not true, but that's what it felt like.
It'll last a little longer. I mean, I was going to ask, when you guys get together after going through all these last 8 weeks, like when you see each other again, like what kind of catch up are you doing? Are you just comparing notes on the weird interactions you're having in the airport? Like what do you do?
The same catch up you have with any friends that you knew very well and haven't seen for a year. But it is a bit of a unique experience. I met up with my kids. My screen kids. I still call them my kids, and my daughters aren't crazy about that. Anyway, I met with Sarah Catherine, Sam and Patrick on St. Patrick's Day in New York, because we all happened to be here at the same time, and it was just fantastic to see each other. And the youngsters wanted to go to a bar. Dad wanted to go to a restaurant. We went out. It was St. Patrick's Day. You couldn't get into a bar. It was packed everywhere, but they let us in some places. And then we just suddenly realised, oh shit, we're the Ratliffs out on the town in New York. And it turned into selfie hell, and we went back to the flat, of course. So, we compare notes on how mad our lives have become, and I try and do that sage thing of being the old one and going, enjoy this because it won't last, and and make sure you make wise choices. Remember your actors, and try and pick the best of whatever scripts arrive. There won't be a Mike White script, so if you raise the bar that high, you can do what I've done a couple of times in the past, which is not work for a very, very long time, waiting for these incredible scripts to arrive, and you need to remind yourself what you do for a living. What you don't do for a living is publicise and get endorsements. That's not a job.
I see what you mean. So remembering your actors means like find the stories, find the thing that you want to actually do as art after when you get like this.
Yeah, these doors open professionally to you for a while, and for all these youngsters, it's the first time. Obviously, for lots of them, they suddenly become very popular and they're very famous, and those things fade quickly, as do the torrent of offers. Everyone's getting offered lots of work, which is lovely, and I was counselling them to take work. I remember when I did The Patriot, I was immediately offered lots and lots of very similar parts, to be fair, opposite every steroided up macho superstar in the world. And I thought, well, I've just done a lovely bad guy opposite Mel. So I went and did a play, then I did a little indie film, and other stuff. And when I looked up, to my horror, that open door through which all the offers were coming had slammed tight on my fingers. It's fine, there've been other opportunities in life, but I was just counselling them to not imagine that this new state of affairs continues forever. It continues when you do good work with good people, and you people think of you as an actor, not as a famous person.
Well, and you work a lot too, like in just like this wide range of things, and a lot of independent films. Like I saw The Salt Path at Toronto last year. I think that's finally going to start coming out.
It's about to come out in England.
Yeah, it gets a good White Lotus boost, hopefully.
Let's hope so. I mean, it is it's part of my job. I'm glad I've been around a long time, and my head doesn't get turned when the air gets very thin. Everybody comes bringing you things, and you get free clothes for a few weeks and stuff. Because, yes, I've just been publicising this enormous show that needed actually no publicity at all, and now I'm going back to England to try and get people to go and watch a very sophisticated, nuanced adult film in the cinemas, which is a very different job.
Totally.
Everybody's not dying to have you on their talk shows to talk about it, and you don't get to walk in fashion shows to promote The Salt Path, but it's a beautiful, beautiful film.
But that's where the work is even more necessary, right? Like where you you feel not the publicity is what the work is, but you kind of understand the mission behind it in some different way.
We have to try and persuade people that it's worth leaving their house, and getting a babysitter or whatever, and that they'll get an experience from it. I feel that responsibility of the public. I try and pick things that I won't be ashamed of publicising, that I would like to see myself. I do really believe in the cinema, and not because I feel for the people, independent filmmakers who don't get to make as many films anymore and don't get audiences, but because there's some magic that happens when we gather in a group to be told a story, something that makes you feel more human and less alone, and it's an engine for compassion and empathy, and adults are getting out of the habit of going.
Yeah.
Kids go, young people go for date movies and for horror films and stuff, and maybe sometimes there's something that touches into the zeitgeist, the tentpole movies, but in between is really struggling to get people to go to the cinema. And I think it's not about importance, but it's one of the great modern, I would say the 20th century, 20th and 21st centuries, one of the great means of communication. And in this world, which is increasingly fragmented, everybody in their silos, political or otherwise, we all know what being human is, and we're made more human by being told stories. And so, it's a cause I want to champion, and that's why I try and do good films, because it'll die out. It'll just disappear. There won't be people making independent films.
Yeah, well, it's something that's changed so much since you started your film career. Like these movies for adults, like these small budget independent films would just like play for longer. They'd be seen by more people. So, as an actor...
They would roll out city by city. So My Big Fat Greek Wedding, for instance, rolled out with the actors going to each local radio station. And today, you open and close in a blink of an eye. And also my friends go, when's it coming on? They don't even say when's it coming on streaming. They say, when's it coming on Netflix, as if Netflix was the only place you could watch streaming films.
Absolutely.
And the answer is too soon it's coming on streaming.
Yeah.
Because the streaming services want to piggyback on any publicity, and they're often put production money in. And if you can see it soon on your TV, it's a disincentive for going out. I wish we had that system they have in France, where you have to wait a very long time before it comes onto your TV. So you're obliged to go to the cinema if you want to see it.
Yeah, I mean, it just feels like the windows on that just keep getting smaller and smaller. Yeah. Like there's no incentive whatsoever to do it. I mean, as an actor, obviously you go where the work is. You have to pick what the good thing is. But how are you balancing that desire that you have for movie theaters to stay alive? Do you feel like it's just making more independent movies? Is it trying to help get a movie made when you have the ability to do that?
I think a long time ago, I try at least, and still manage occasionally, to let go of expectations or results. If I read something I think is great, or I like the people, whether or not they have enough money to make it, whether it looks like it might come out, whether it looks like people will go to the cinema to see it. I'm there for the journey, not the destination. I feel bad for the financiers and the filmmakers. They need people to go and do it. And when it's time for it to come out, I'll publicize it. But I let go of that stuff a long time ago. I really like this story, and I really like these people, and I want to go off and have an adventure with them. And the films I've got 3 films coming out back to back now. We didn't make them back to back at all. Some of them struggled to find distribution. Some of them, for whatever reasons. I don't make it for the results. I don't make it for the audience, actually. It's so weird when members of the public come and thank me for a performance somewhere, and I go, it's such a selfish thing. I get to have this experience of being part of storytelling, which is a very fulfilling thing. So I don't know. I'm not doing it to try and keep cinema alive, is what I'm saying. Yeah. I'm doing it because I just like it. I just like doing it. It doesn't pay the bills or anything, but I just like it.
But when someone thanks you for something, you make something that makes an impact in that way, you have this moment being like, oh, wow, it is bigger than me. Like, it's easy to kind of lose track of that when you're making something for the experience, and then you get to step back and say, holy cow, like this had an impact that I couldn't have imagined being on that set wherever it was. Yeah,
I mean, that happens rarely. There's a few projects it's happened with. I mean, all good stories work with people, and you've no idea what people will take from it. Which is why my least favourite question ever asked by any entertainment journalist is, what do you want people to take away from this movie or from the TV show? And you go, that's not, it's 8 hours for a start. If it would be condensed into a bumper sticker, that's what they would have made. And secondly, that's whatever they get from it. Right? Who knows what part of their soul or life experience it's touched. But no, there's only a couple of projects that have this kind of afterlife that it was unexpected. And one is Harry Potter, of course, that people come up all the time, and I go to conventions and where people want to tell you how it saved their life, which seems like a bunch of hyperbole until they break it down and get granular, and you go, oh my God, it actually really did save your life. You were suicidal, or you were lonely, you were abused, you were rejected, and you took something from this story, you found something in it that told you things were going to be better, or that you could be hopeful, or whatever. And that's an extraordinary thing with Harry Potter. And I've listened to my castmates and other people break down why that is, as if somehow you can distill it. And of course, if you could distill it, they'd have reproduced it, and no one has. But something magic happened between the pages of those books that Joe wrote and the films, I guess. And there's no way of telling, whatever else it is. And when people thank me because it meant something to them, the OA is another one. The Netflix show, The OA.
That has such a deep, beloved fan base for that,
Yeah, but also they have felt moved or changed or inspired in their own lives by watching this story. Other things, people come up and they want to say they liked it. Or even they want to be complimentary about me, the way I turned myself into someone else. And that's fun and fine. That's talking about acting. But there's just a few projects that touch people in a much deeper way. And I can, just to mind, I think of the vaguely PSA ones, the ones that are about something profound in the human condition or experience, like Mass.
Yeah, I was just thinking of Mass,
Mass is a film, I think they messed up slightly the marketing of it, or the publicity of it, because people thought it was depressing, or it was about school shooting. Neither of those things are true. It's actually about the power of forgiveness. It happened to be a school shooting. Could have been a multiple pile-up car crash. Could have been anything, drunk driving. It's about, if you carry hatred in your heart, carry resentment, you're poisoning yourself, like taking poison to hurt someone else. It's about the spiritual gift of forgiving and how that can, how that can free you in your life. And I thought it's such a beautiful message. And so people who watch that film, they don't want to come up and say, oh, you were wonderful, or isn't Anne Dowd great? Or they want to come up and tell you something that happened in their life and how that helped them with something in their life, which is, the highest aspiration of art. If you can ever do that, it's great. But I don't think about it going in. You go in and go, this is extraordinary. I want to walk in those shoes. I want to feel what it's like to be that person in that amazing experience. I'm a seeker of extreme experiences, and I get to do it safely on set. I get to do it unsafely in my life quite often. I'm a bit of a thrill seeker physically, but I don't particularly want to be in a war or, God forbid, lose my children and stuff, but I get to see what it's like to have very extreme emotional experiences in a safe environment.
Do you think all actors are thrill seekers on some level? Like, not everyone's doing extreme sports, but you have to have that desire to seek out something scary to do this job?
No, some people are doing it because they had really great teeth, or they grew up in a town where, they were the quarterback of the football team, or they were the beauty pageant queen, and they go, or, people have always said, you should be an actor because you've got something. And they walk into a room, and I've done it, I produced a few times when I've been cast early in something, and I at all the auditions, and there's a real binary split between people who walk in the room and are selling themselves. It doesn't mean they're not very good actors, and they're much more likely to become stars. There's something about them that is just so charismatic and often sexy, but not necessarily that. And then there's other people who come from a tradition like me, who want to be anything other than themselves, who are there to try and explore what it's like to be other people because they're not quite sure who to be. And you can always tell the difference. And then if you then are reading something or watching a self-tape, they'll do both can do the job, but it's very different motivations.
Yeah. I imagine for the career like yours too, where you're working so often, you're, doing parts of TV shows, leading some TV shows, you're not just adapting yourself as a character, but you've got to go into a different workplace and work with different people. And, you got 3 projects coming out this year. And is that something you have to get into this to be able to, adapt and get along with whoever you're working with? Or do you have to acquire that skill over time?
I think, funnily enough, that might be why I became an actor, because I was always a code switcher. I grew up very uncomfortable in my own skin, which is odd because people don't remember me that way. But certainly that was the way I experienced myself. And I wanted to be whoever I thought you wanted to be and might like. So I changed my accent, for instance, lots of times. I was constantly switching between accents depending on which crowd of people I was mixing with growing up. And even probably changed my attitudes, and those things become more embedded as you get older. And I've got kids and my wife, and it would be embarrassing. Although still sometimes they're in the back of a taxi with me and they go, "Dad, what are you doing? You're not Irish." So I think that ability to adapt to different situations was one of the reasons I was drawn to acting, and also one of the reasons I love the fact that I can now, and I have in my working life, shadowed soldiers, politicians, criminals, people from the highest and lowest walks of life, and being comfortable, I made them comfortable in any circle. I like that about being kind of Zelig-like.
Yeah. Well, and that's how you build a career. If no one likes having you on the set and you can't get along with people, they're not going to keep bringing you back for things. So I feel like that's a secret too.
And I wish that was true. There are some very difficult people around who are impossible to work with. And they often have very successful careers.
That's true.
If the work keeps doing all right and people watch it, people keep working. And very rarely, if they're awful and behave terribly, does that affect their career badly until the shows or the films don't work.
Yeah.
There's some real dysfunction on the set because you're dealing with something odd and emotional and unpredictable and human. And also, you cannot let the machine grind to a halt. So if someone's behaving appallingly, in any other working environment, they wouldn't be allowed to work. You'd have a word with them. You'd stop it happening, or they would be fired, or whatever. But when actors or actresses behave appallingly, no one takes them aside. No one tells them off as such. No one stops them, because if you throw them, they maybe won't come on camera again, or they'll come on camera and they'll be distracted. You can see it in their eyes. And so really terrible behavior is enabled all the time.
Yeah. Well, this is your chance to say that you're the one who's trying to get everyone, you have to talk about your own ability to work with everybody, not being the bad one.
I don't think there's anybody who doesn't think they themselves are easy to get along with, professional. No one would describe themselves as if I think I'm fab and speak to any people I work with. I hope they would say the same. But then, of course, everybody says that about everybody. No one ever breaks ranks. You never actually see people on a press junket talk about how appalling anyone else is, because that would be career suicide. At the end of careers, possibly people write autobiographies in which they spill the beans.
Are you going to write yours?
I've been asked a few times, and actually quite recently I was asked again. I sat down and go, well, what would I fill it with? My memory's poor, but I have certain anecdotes I could string together. I remember Matthew McConaughey didn't do a chronological thing, did a rather fabulous book full of, McConaugheyisms, whatever. And I looked, and all the most interesting stories, the things I tell my friends or at dinner parties, or the reason people approach me, are just appallingly defamatory stories about terrible behaviour. They're the fun things. And I would be I probably couldn't be sued because they're true, but I think I would blow up every bridge that I'd crossed or might ever cross, so I'm not sure I'll do it now.
Posthumous, you can write it and have it be published 20 years after your death.
Ago. There was a great book, probably before you were born, called Julia Phillips' book called You'll Never Eat Lunch in This Town Again. She'd been one of the biggest producers in the world in the 70s, and she wrote a book thinking, well, I've blown all my connections anyway, which was so scandalous and scurrilous and unputdownable and brilliant, but she was no longer making films. I would like to continue working, and so I'll keep these things close to my chest and tell my close friends. It reminds me of my youngest daughter, Ruby. When she was, 6, 7, 8, whatever, I would always lie in bed and tell her stories until she fell asleep, or read her stories. And one day she went, "Oh, Dad, don't read any more stories. Just tell me stories from your life." And I'm like, So I started to just tell her stories from my life. And then after a while, I don't know if it was days or weeks or months, she went, "Dad, why are you such a loser in all of your stories?" And of course, I told stories that came to a crashing halt or where something went terribly wrong. And I went, well, what's the alternative? You'll tell a story where you came out really well, did something great. And I went, that's not me, love. It's not very English either.
Also, there's no drama to it, right? It's a story where it's just happiness. You got to have some ups and downs to get
But who would tell stories in which they triumphed and came out? Well, who would tell stories? A lot of the actors I've worked with.
I was to say. A lot of autobiographies about all of the successes people have had in their lives. It tends to be a common...
I know Richard E. Grant quite well, and Rich has written rather brilliant memoirs in which he doesn't throw anybody under the bus. They're entertaining and kind of spicy, but I don't know how he walks that line. Mine would unquestionably cross the line on page 1.
Yeah. I mean, okay, now I really feel like you have to get that ready for at least for
nobody wants to read. I went and did this thing with these people. They were all lovely. We had a great time. Yeah. You know, I think the publishers would want their advance back.
Well, all right, we'll figure that balance of it out. I mean, so you're saying you want to keep working, and you really you work so often that you have this really prolific, varied career. Is that pace sustainable, or do you want to keep going on that path and bouncing all over the place?
Actually, don't work often. I've got 3 films coming out, but they were made years apart.
Yeah.
No, when I do things like White Lotus, which is of such fabulous quality, even better really than I thought while we were making it, because the other stories I didn't watch, of course, being filmed.
Yeah.
And Mike's and John has done some extraordinary stuff in the edit. Watching it, you think, well, I want to try and be in things just as good again next. Yeah. And that means that you don't work. And I've done that a few times in my life, made the terrible mistake of keeping myself unemployed for a very long time, waiting for something to come in that's as good as what I've just finished. So I don't work all the time. Actually, sometimes they back up and then vomit out one after the other, and it makes it quite difficult to publicise them. But I'm old, so I've done a lot of stuff. It seems... to people, if you look up on IMDb what someone's done and you see this volume, it looks like you work all the time, but I've been doing it since 1988. So there is a lot of work. And every now and again, thank God, there's something that penetrates the zeitgeist and works for a generation, or a different subsection of the community. So when I'm here walking down the street in New York and someone approaches me to speak, there's a game I play with myself to entertain only myself. I don't know why I'm telling you. It's slightly nauseous, but there we are. Trying to guess what it is they know me from. Yeah. And I from the way they're dressed or the way they walk.
I'm sure you can tell.
Well, there's so many different worlds that I've been lucky enough to dabble in. So if they look slightly millennial and there's some tie-dye on them, it'll be the OA. If it looks like they're going to mug me, it'll be Brotherhood. If they stand square and have a certain haircut, it's going to be one of the war films. If they're with their mother, it's going to be Star Trek, and that's a cheap gag, not true. And White Lotus now, if it depends on what kind of dock shoes they're wearing or whatever. It's everyone White Lotus for the next 2 weeks only. But it's, it's nice to have been around long enough that there's something for everyone.
Yeah. I mean, I know you had now spent the last 8 weeks talking about accents for a long time, and I'm not going to
That's fine.
go over it.
I love accents. I'll talk about them forever.
I'm talking to you from Durham, North Carolina. I promise I was not a trip. I literally live here.
Oh my God!
And grew up in South Carolina. It's all around me, and I've been saying for weeks about how there are certain lines that you do that just sound like every white collar criminal politician who I remember from growing up. But my question is less about the accents than the culture of it. Like the Patriot filmed in South Carolina, big landmark for so many people that I know.
Sure.
What of the culture part of it did you feel like you needed to get with and stick with? You're obviously not spending time in Durham, but how did that part of it work for you?
I have spent time when I was just over the border in South Carolina, and we were in Rock Hill. I went to Charlotte quite often. I went to North Carolina. I'm an explorer, and I was playing a lot of golf. So I went to lots of golf clubs, and I met an awful lot of ratliffs there. And also, being an actor, you have access to you're allowed in all kinds of doors that you wouldn't otherwise be allowed in. So I've mixed with billionaires, I've mixed with farmers, and I mixed with plantation owners where I was there, and I knew a whole bunch of people. I know finance people partly because I studied law originally, and when I left to go to drama school, many of my contemporaries went into the recently deregulated financial world and stayed in there, and they're still still friends. And when I did Brotherhood, I lived in an area of Rhode Island that had a bunch of people who worked in finance, many of whom I got to know, although they had different accents. There's a certain way that people who have unlimited resources engage with the world that I'm familiar with. It doesn't mean they're nice or not nice. A long time ago, I stopped I got over my inverted snobbery of thinking that very rich people needed to be awful and the salt of the earth for people who were struggling. That, that's never true. But I've seen the worst and best of all worlds, and that's what continues to fascinate me. I was very familiar with who I thought Tim was, and also who he was as a dad and who he was as a husband. There's something slightly forensic about the way actors behave socially. We're constantly watching and picking apart, and if you're like me, unfiltered, asking about the most awkward things in people's lives. Certainly talking to other people. So looking at their marriage, working about how often they do, things that people never ask, how often they do or don't have sex, when they stop loving each other, what his real hopes for his children are, and what he says to them, and how disappointed he is or isn't by how they're turning out. All those things are the kinds of things that I engage with. When I meet people and they give me access to their life and I shadow them, I ask them the most awkward and difficult questions they've ever been asked in their life. And for some reason, people open up to actors because they know you're not a journalist and you're not going to publish it. You're just going to try and use it. And they often, it's a blessed relief for them. They've never spoken about these things before. Invariably, when I meet someone, within minutes talking to them about things that afterwards they wish they hadn't answered.
Is that only with people?
A couple of times I thought about doing a podcast. People ask me, and I'm when trying to come up with the title, I'm always thinking, can it be, the questions you wish I hadn't asked, or Jason Ice asked the awkward questions. I don't know how to ask the nice ones.
I mean, as someone who asks questions for my job, how do you get used to that, to knowing that you can and it's worth asking those kinds of questions? I feel like I'm always trying to be too polite.
Well, you need access. So I'm with someone, they can walk away. But in Los Angeles, for instance, when I lived there, I'd often go to people's houses and I'd think, well, I've seen what you have and haven't done for a living, and I know it could not possibly pay for this house. Mm-hmm. So one of the first things I always ask is, how did you get this house?
Do they tell you?
Often well, they're so shocked I've asked, Yeah, and how do you pay for the schools? I know how much the schools cost. What schools your kids go to? How do you pay for it? And have you got savings? And they're so shocked that I've asked that they don't have any defences ready to fend the questions off. Death, taxes, and money. There's
literally a podcast. Have you ever listened to Death, Sex, and Money, the podcast?
No, I didn't know there was one.
It's so good. It's just literally about asking those three questions.
If I had famous people on, as you have all the time, I would want to ask them, what I asked them in life is, what's it like being this rich? How has it affected your family members? Are you wary about people asking for money? What are your old friends like?
Yeah.
No one wants to talk about how much money they've got. These people who get paid, I'm not one of those people, by the way, who get paid millions and millions for their jobs and have enough money to know that they are secure whatever happens in the world, and so are generations of their family. It changes everything about their life, but nobody ever asks them about that because it's awkward and embarrassing for them. It's the first thing I ask those people when I meet them.
Yeah. Well, it's what drives a show like The White Lotus, right? Is the question of how that wealth changes people.
Exactly. So this is a long, rambling answer for how did I research someone like Tim Ratcliffe? It's because I've always asked those rich people what it's like being that rich, and what they do with their money, and whether they're going to give it to their children, and whether it's changed the way that how much they give to charity. People really don't want to be asked whether they give. They go, I'm religious to go to church, and in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, you're meant to give 10% of your gross income every year, minimum, to a charity, and not to your local church, and not to your family, and not to your trust fund and stuff. And when I ask people, as I often do that, they start looking at their feet and shuffling very quickly.
It's such a superpower to be able to ask people questions like that.
It is. They don't have to answer, but they do. I shadowed a plastic surgeon for a film a couple of years ago, and at the beginning of the day, he wouldn't answer any of these very difficult questions I asked him about money and about whether he looked at people, and immediately thought, Jesus, why haven't you done your nose done? Those lips are awful. And he said, absolutely not. Everybody's beautiful. By the end of the day, he was telling me some very different stories.
Yeah. Yeah, you get people to take down their barriers.
Yeah.
Question from my South Carolina relatives, too. I know that Southern Charm was a touch point you guys had from Mike White. Did the Murdoch family come up for you guys at all as a dad who killed members of his family? Was that any part of your research at all? Okay.
I didn't do that much of Southern Charm because it wasn't that helpful, because I knew very quickly that it wasn't the right accent. Mm-hmm. It's Charleston, and those weird vowel sounds, the dipped on the O sound and the R sound, are completely different. I didn't want to over-listen to it. It's different. And particularly for Tim, accents, I just love diving into the way people speak, because it's not just a reflection of where they grew up at all and their education and what their parents sound like. It's what they want to sound like.
Yeah.
So I'm from Liverpool, for instance. So like my natural accent growing up was like that. My relatives talk like that. Some of them talk like that. like, you know, chicken and chips and stuff like that. But mine was a slightly more refined thing, but it's still got Liverpool rhythms. And when people do the Beatles, they forget the Beatles were trying to sound Californian because they were younger. They wanted to be like, you know, they were actually changing their accent to try and sound like their heroes. So Tim wants to sound like his grandfather. Tim is actually slightly, you know, some of the vowel sounds, but then he's listening to his wife, who's out of her mind on drugs and is sounding more and more grotesque to him all the time. So then he tries to make himself, and because he's in business, it does the combination of growing up wanting to sound like his grandfather, because that, you know, there's statues to his relatives in Durham, and also wanting not to sound too drawly because his wife is drawling all the time, you know, and stretching things out. So all those things led into the voice I came up with.
Yeah. I mean, there's the code switching thing too, is right. Like, depending on the crowd that you're in, you want to sound more or less Southern, which, like, I've done every time I go home and go to the drugstore. The accent can kind of come and go. And the fact that the kids don't have accents on the show is, I think, one of the smartest choices that, you know, that you guys made, because it makes living here. It makes absolute perfect sense.
I remember going to Fort Benning in Georgia and training with the Rangers for Black Hawk Down. And thinking, okay, well, I picked a guy to do his accent. I knew he'd do him in the film. I said, do you mind if I tape you? And I taped him, broke it down phonetically and all this stuff. And I think he'd been shot in the jaw. That's why it had a particular sound. But a couple of the guys asked where they're from. They had fully Southern accents. But I wanted to know, you know, being an actor and having listened to the reaction that Southern people have often to a horrible generalized accent, I wanted to know, what were they? Arkansas, Kentucky, you know, Alabama, anything. One guy was in Boston. And I went, you're from where? It's because he wanted to sound like his drill instructors. That's how drills, you know, were done, and that's how orders were given in the army in Southern accents, because that's where the army bases were. And he had code switched completely. Yeah. You know, so I find that stuff fascinating.
People are completely fascinating. Last question for you before I then let you go. I know the Duke shirt you wore at the finale screening was pushed at the Charlotte airport. I know exactly where that is. Like, I could picture the kiosk where that would come from exactly. Are you going to keep it? Or is any Duke affection going to stick with you?
Duke affection, or presumably Duke affection. I bought the T-shirt because the airline cancelled my flight and took my bags away, and I had nothing to change into in the morning. It was the only outlet there. And I also thought it might cause a bit of mischief.
Which is, I think it did.
I mean, I found the whole thing faintly amusing. You know, I don't like anyone getting upset about anything, but clearly it was just someone fancying seeing their name online and, you know, in some department wanting to go viral. Their real-life alumni are such a rogues gallery, many of them. The notion that this rather spiritually enlightened character on television causes them any trouble is fanciful and ridiculous. But it fits, and I do love blue. And,
it's a good color.
I didn't even know that the devil... I mean, I didn't know it was their team. It was the only thing that didn't say Duke on it, and I thought, well, okay, I'll have that. But once I found out, I thought it would be a fun thing to wear for the photographs.
It is a better color than Tar Heel blue. I have the affection for UNC, but I think that color is not great.
I had a Tar Heel hat when I was making the Patriots. I had a light blue.
Oh, yeah, because right there.
Is it light blue, or is that the?
Yeah, it's like a powdery kind of light blue, and it's. Sorry, I'm really going to get in trouble with my neighbors for talking bad about Tar Heel blue.
I didn't even know what game they were playing. Literally, I didn't know if it was baseball, football, or curling.
Yeah, well, I think the image of you is going to come up every March Madness forever now. So that would be another thing.
They asked me to go and sing the national anthem, and I could do, possibly do Roseanne. I sing very badly, but it didn't happen. There we go. Maybe next time.
Maybe next year. That does it for today's episode. This podcast is edited by Brett Fuchs and produced by Brett Fuchs and me. Our theme music is by Dave Gonzalez. Thanks again to my co-host, Natalie Jarvey. Please subscribe to her newsletter, like and subscribe. And you can subscribe to the Prestige Junkie newsletter at theankler.com and subscribe to this podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. We will see you next week.